From the first book of Christmas in My Heart, compiled by Joe Wheeler, this is Christmas Echo by Les Thomas. Good evening and happy holidays. The temperature is 35 degrees under cloudy skies. The National Weather Service forecasts a 30% chance of snow tonight. It could be the first white Christmas on record here in 41 years. The radio voice startled the old man who had been asleep in his stuffed chair by the fireplace. He coughed and rubbed his face and stared at the coals that rose and fell in half-hearted, tiny flames. One word fixed his attention in the broadcast. Snow. That's always what they say, he muttered to himself, but I don't see how it can happen. Not cold enough. I doubt it. I doubt it very much. Still, the prospect was enough to make him stretch and get up unsteadily. He walked slowly over the bare living room floor and pulled back the drapes to look out over the lawn. Across the street, red, green, and yellow lights sparkled on the roof of William's house and outlined the picture window in front of a flocked white tree. The old man could see Williams, his young daughter in his arms, and his wife finishing the last of the tree's decorations. A north wind brushed the trees and frosted up the window where he stood. The old man craned his neck to look as far as he could in both directions. There was not a trace of a snowflake. He turned around, and his gaze fell for a moment on the photograph in the silver frame on top of the piano. There were two people in the picture. One was a pleasant-looking woman with brown hair who was dressed in an old-fashioned heavy winter coat and high shoes. The other was a girl of about 6. In the photograph, the woman and the child were holding hands. They were standing in snow. Brubaker was 72 years old. A long time ago, he had promised himself that he would try not to think so much about the people in the photograph. But each Christmas, it was a promise he never tried to keep. He walked over and sat down again and stared at the remnants of the fire. Ordinarily, Brubaker disliked daydreams. It was a lesson he had learned. Bad to let the mind wander. Bad to dream. He came to accept that in a way that had changed him slowly, almost imperceptibly, in grades of lessening rage in the years that passed after he lost Emily and Julie. Eventually, Brubaker was able to accept death. Yes, he thought, death is reality. It is truth. It was life that he could no longer trust. Only a fool would believe in it, he ranted once, and if you do, life will drive you crazy. He came to believe those things not suddenly, but over the space of many years. With music, it was different. He gave that up almost immediately. The day after the accident, Brubaker resigned his job as band teacher of the high school. Later, he took a job at the mill, glad to be able to drown the melody that was his life in the cacophony of pounding hammers and forges. Out, too, without remorse, went the piles of records. One day, he very calmly took a hammer and smashed to bits all of the black discs that he and Emily had so carefully scrimped to buy. Then he collected all the sheet music and the manuscripts and quickly shredded them, too. It all lay in a heap, the whole sweet serenade of the 30s, all of Harry James, the Dorseys, Glenn Miller, and Audrey Shaw. 2 things survived the purge of music in Brubaker's life. One was Emily's piano. The other was a silver trumpet that rested in its cover on a shelf of the bedroom closet. Brubaker could not explain why he kept them. In fact, he had once tried to rid himself of them, too, but he found himself going after them later with embarrassment, asking to buy them back. He told himself they were not really instruments capable of making music anymore, but only monuments, silent monuments. And they were relics that no longer had souls or hearts. That part of them was finished. Never again, Brubaker decided, would they play melodies to taunt and remind him of the deception of happiness that had ended in such unbearable catastrophe. Feeling chill, Brubaker shivered suddenly and coughed. He got up and walked into the kitchen, found the prescription bottle, and slowly drained the last drops into a teaspoon. He glanced at the kitchen clock. It was almost 9 o'clock. Perhaps it is not too late, he thought, to get this refilled. Brubaker got a telephone book from the drawer, took his glasses out of his pocket, and absent-mindedly put them on. He leafed through pages: pawn shops, pet supplies, pharmacies, Hall's Drugs, Town Drugstore, Smith's Pharmacy. Rheumatic and far past the age of normal retirement, Samuel Benjamin Smith stooped over greatly, and his head bobbed when he walked. Beneath starch white hair, he wore old-fashioned bifocals that perched continually on the end of his nose, and whenever anything happened out of the ordinary, Sam Smith's eyes would slowly elevate above the lenses like search beacons looking for whatever was the matter. The beacons were on when Sam hung up the telephone. He turned around with his head bobbing and slowly began poking through the inventory along the back shelves of the druggist's room in the back of the ancient drugstore. Out in front, Billy was sweeping away the last debris of the Christmas Eve rush when he heard Sam call him. 17 years old and a senior in high school, Billy was rounding out 3 years as an employee of Smith's drugstore. He liked the job. Many times Sam had told him he was the best helper he had ever had. Even customers said Billy was a natural for the drugstore business. Already he had an offer of a full scholarship in science at the state college. After that, there would be pharmacy school. Who knows? He might even take over the business from Sam. Billy thought so. After all, he had a talent for it. The only thing he could do as well was play the horn. He was first chair in the school stage band. He even played trumpet with a group of older guys who played weekend dances. But you can't make a living with that kind of music. Those days were gone, and Billy knew it. Still, it was fun to fool around. Mentally, he thought of a difficult piece the group had been working on as he hurried off to the back of the store. Sam was filling a small brown bottle with a syrupy mixture. "Looks like you'll have to make one last delivery," Sam said, looking up. "I want you to take this over to Ed Brubaker on Oak Street. It's the old brick house on the corner across from the depot." Sam twisted the cap on the bottle and looked slowly over the top of his glasses to study Billy, who was whistling softly the practice tune that was running through his mind. He stopped whistling when he saw Sam look up. "Now there was a musician," Sam said, shaking his head, tapping the bottle of cough syrup. "Old Ed Brubaker, when he was a young man, could play with the best of them. Why, there was talk he even had an offer to go to New York with one of those big bands. They played real music in those days. Music was Ed's whole life. You never saw a happier fellow. He even got the high school band to sounding like a big orchestra. Those fellows were always giving the town a serenade. Ed saw to it there was always music. Easter, the 4th of July, all the holidays. Ed always had the band right there. But the best of it, the very best, was always Christmas Eve. That was special. They'd all pile in those old cars and go up to the mountain. Everyone in town used to wait up to hear it. Just before midnight, Ed would raise up that trumpet, and then he'd start to play real low at first, so low you thought you were dreaming it, and then it'd get louder. Lord, it was music so sweet you'd have bet that Gabriel himself was calling you. And then they'd fire off that old cannon from the school right at the stroke of midnight. And that was how it happened. Let's see, it was Christmas 1933. No, 1934. Terrible thing. Maybe it was the cold and the snow that caused it. They never did know. That cannon just blew up in their faces. Ed was the only one who wasn't hurt. The explosion killed 3 people. One was a girl from the high school. The others were Ed's wife and his little daughter. It was a terrible thing to happen, just terrible. Afterward, Ed barely said a word again to anybody, not even after all these years, and he never played music again. Outside, Billy shivered in the chilly wind and climbed on the delivery bicycle to ride the 4 blocks and make his delivery. On the way, he thought about the things Sam told him about the man who was waiting for the package in his pocket. He made the block through the business section in front of stores still crowded with late shoppers, and cut down through residential streets in the old part of town. The icy wind stung his face, and he pulled his woolen cap lower. It was freezing, but he was in no special hurry to meet this sad man on the eve of Christmas. Finally, he turned onto Oak and pulled up in the driveway of the small brick house with a steep, high roof. The trim of the house was green, and the brick was dark red, and it was set near the front of an immaculate yard and hedges, carefully manicured, Billy supposed, by someone with a lot of time on his hands. The man who answered was wearing a heavy sweater and baggy wool trousers. When he reached through the door to take the package, Billy saw him fumble for a minute, then drop a metal object into his pocket as if to hide it. Still, Billy recognized it instantly. The old man had been holding a trumpet mouthpiece in his hand. The thought of it flashed into his mind like an incongruous piece of a puzzle. He was intrigued by the mystery of it. While the old man counted out the change, the delivery boy looked at him and tried to think of the words that might unlock part of the mystery. He wanted to say something, anything. But what? Then it was too late. He watched the old man take a wrinkled $5 bill from his pocket, fold it once, and put it in his hand. "This is for you," he said, "and Merry Christmas." Billy took the long way back. He turned up through the business district, past the square. The stores were closing now, and the streets were almost empty. He turned the corner and saw a young couple swinging a little girl between their arms. The child giggled with delight, and the couple laughed. Billy rode past the square another block and turned east toward home. In the kitchen, Brubaker unscrewed the cap and poured another teaspoon of the cough medicine. He put the bottle in the cupboard and glanced again at the clock. Then he turned around, walked slowly into the living room, and took his heavy coat from the closet. Unlatching the back door, he flipped on the porch light that lighted the little courtyard garden in back, and walked out and sat down on the garden bench. Brubaker leaned back and closed his eyes, letting his thoughts drift back to Christmases of long ago, Christmases that might have been. He tried to picture the three of them together, laughing, happy. Brubaker sighed heavily and shrugged. In his hands, the silver trumpet reflected in the moonlight. The wind had slowed now, and the night was still and quiet. It was almost midnight. Brubaker closed his eyes again. Then he heard it. It was very faint at first, so soft Brubaker thought he might be dreaming. But then he knew he wasn't. The notes were clear and mellow, ringing like wisps of wind coming unmistakably from the mountain. With each bar of the Christmas carol, the trumpet's call seemed to grow, like a choir adding voices, like the triumphant march of a musical army. Brubaker felt his emotions welling with each note, till the tears finally flooded his cheeks. Then, like a man in a dream, he picked up the trumpet, and, lifting it to his lips, began to play an echo to the mountain serenade, a salute to the unseen musician. Together the two voices in harmony soared over the notes, calling each to the other's call, and showering the silent city with a serenade. After a long while at the top of the mountain, Billy could still hear the echo pounding in his ears when he reached down and closed the snaps of his trumpet case. Across town, when the music ended, Sam Smith went over to a window and looked out across his lawn. "Melinda, come see," he said. "It's snowing."